The house smelled like roasted peppers and quiet expectations. They had always liked the small domestic things that made a family look like a photograph, china on display, curtains pressed to the same fold. Lena stood by the island, a practiced smile anchored to her face. My mother's nod was louder than any speech. My father did not clear his throat before sliding a folder across the table. He said Lena's name like an appointment already kept. I didn't argue. I didn't open my mouth. I put my fingers on the tablet in my lap and felt the edges of every late night, every phone call, every list I had made to hold them steady. They only saw what they'd wanted to see, Lena's dresses, her laughter framed for the page. I'd always been the scaffolding, the one whose usefulness carved the shape of my days. Do you know the way a life feels when it has been tallied and assigned? They called me practical, as if it were a compliment. They called Lena the future, as if futures arrive fully formed. When I was 16, I brought a sheet cake from a grocery counter because the mortgage didn't wait for sparklers. My mother kissed my cheek and told me to grab my work uniform. You're good with the serious things, she whispered, turning the phrase into an occupation. Hours at the facility taught me how to move without demanding notice. Hallways hummed with antiseptic and soft lights. I learned names, routines, the exact rhythm a day needed to avoid disaster. I learned how to make impossible schedules sound like solutions. Sometimes I would catch my reflection in the glass doors, hair tied back, posture straight, and feel older than my years, as if I were living inside someone else's plans. Lena left for the city years ago. She called sometimes, voice bright, asking small favors. My parents sent money. My work kept the doors open when the regulations tightened and staff left. When the illness came, they came to me. I signed papers on a vinyl chair at 2 in the morning. My mother nodded as if signings were ritual, not choices. My father never said thank you. He said, "You're good with the serious things," and left the rest unsaid. Then the small erasures began. Emails went without my name. Meetings were scheduled without my input. Invitations arrived in the mailbox like formalities. One invitation had gold lettering and a date for a legacy celebration, as if someone else had already been given the role I had lived. The caption on a photo read, "Future Leadership," and Lena smiled as if the world had already given her what it wanted to give. That night, I sat with a blank document and wrote the truth in a way I had never written it before. A timeline. 10 years compressed into bullet points, emergency calls, staffing freezes, inspections averted by midnight fixes, the contracts I had negotiated, the licenses I had kept alive. I listed names as vendors, physicians, partners, not to accuse, but to make visible the web I had woven. The case existed, I realized. I only had to assemble it. The morning air was gray when I drove to Dr. Hale's office. He read the timeline without surprise. People who care for systems prefer the steady facts. They're moving without you, he said, not unkindly. You're done asking to be seen. Ms. Rowan arrived with a leather portfolio and a calm that maps exactly where to put shields around what matters. They taught me the language of structure, licenses, compliance, institutional capital. We built a framework that protected the work from being reduced to a name on a plaque. I named the nonprofit quietly, Harbor Bridge Foundation. A bridge is not a trophy, it is a crossing. Under the power of attorney, transfers and safeguards were executed with the care of someone administering medication, precise, measured, and necessary. My parents signed what they thought were routine papers. They were given honorary advisory roles, while the backbone I had built moved under a different language. That evening the house felt unchanged, and yet everything had shifted. I went to sleep without the weight of fixing what they'd already broken. Outside, the quiet folded around the property like a protective hush. Inside, Lena's laughter drifted down the stairs like a memory of sunlight. I closed my tablet and waited for the hours to do their work. When they thought documents were routine, I moved the spine of the system into place. The work was not dramatic, it was meticulous. Licenses are not glamorous, but they are gravity. Compliance is invisible until it fails. Partnerships are like stitches, they hold when others pull apart. Ms. Rowan and Dr. Hale taught me how to make legal scaffolding that would not bend for appearances. We crafted a non-profit to hold the protocols, the licenses, the data, the partnerships. Harbor Bridge Foundation became more than a name, it became a mechanism. I executed transfers under the authority I held, not to punish, but to protect the people we cared for. My parents believed the signatures they gave were for paperwork tied to illness and continuity. They signed in good faith, trusting the ritual of doctors' notes and oversight. They did not read the language that made authority separate from ownership. That was the point. I carried on with my work as if nothing had changed. Routine became my armor. The staff noticed the difference, a quiet respect, not loud praise. Lena floated through rooms with a notebook full of colors and website ideas. She posed in photographs, the family's ceremonial face. I kept the spreadsheets and vendor calls and the nightly checks that no one else thought to make. Only when the celebration invitation arrived did I realize how neatly they had placed me outside the marquee. The invitation was a polite fiction, the future was being declared, not earned. Weeks of legal preparation became invisible to the family. The foundation existed on paper in meetings and signatures, but it existed in reality as a lever. If the standards dropped, certification stopped. Without certification, a facility is a building with lights and walls, not a place of care. The language in the documents was exact: staffing ratios, safety protocols, auditing triggers. It sounded technical and small, boring, even, until you realize how easily a title can become an empty costume. On the day of the legacy celebration, I sat in a small office behind the nurse station until the moment arrived. Fluorescent lights buzzed in the background. I printed a single letter to Lena and folded it into a red envelope. I did not write to shame. I wrote to make clear what the title would truly ask of her. The letter ended with a single line I had learned to mean more than words: what you carry next depends on what you choose to hold. At the party the room glowed with linen and crystal. My parents wore recognition like a costume. Guests murmured praise. Lena sat between them, hands poised around a glass. My father tapped a spoon to call the room to attention and announced, with the easy gravity of the privileged, that Lena was ready to lead. Applause softened like a blanket over the truth. People mistook my silence for grace. They smiled and believed the story they'd rehearsed. I placed 3 objects on the table: the keys, the notarized power of attorney, and the red envelope. The metallic clink of keys was precise, a sound that cut through the warmth. My father frowned. "Kara, this isn't necessary," he said. I slid everything toward Lena. Her fingers found the envelope first. She opened it, scanning the pages with a face that changed color as she read. Her breath became a small, disbelieving sound. "This can't be right," she whispered. "You're joking." Paper rustled. My father's face lowered to a pallor I had not seen before. He grabbed at pages and read the sections that described transfers to Harbor Bridge Foundation, the clauses that required certification to operate the facilities. "This says we don't own any of this," my mother said, panic raw at the edges. The attorney in the room, who had blended into the background like a stagehand, explained the truth with calm precision. The documents were executed under valid authority, with medical verification and signatures. Silence unfolded in the room like a curtain. Guests shifted in their seats. Lena's posture dissolved into something small and uncertain. The bones of the family's image showed through, what they had valued and what they had ignored. Somebody muttered about fairness. Somebody else looked away. Hayes, the attorney, said quietly that Harbor Bridge would protect the staff and seniors by holding the real authority, not to punish, but to ensure care standards persisted. Without those standards, the buildings could not operate. In that hush, I felt something unlatch inside me. It was not triumph. It was something quieter, a relief so sharp it tasted like air. I stepped back as if removing my hands from a ledger. The room watched me as if I were a character in their story rather than a person who had done the work. I left the party with nothing dramatic behind me, only a paper trail that would speak in time. After that night, the world split along a clean seam. My parents found themselves caretakers of a name without the structure that made the name mean anything. The bank notices, the staffing shifts, the compliance audits, they all moved toward the core of responsibility where my work had always lived. I no longer received the phone calls that had once pulled me into midnight scrambles. The silence was strange, like waking in a room you didn't know you owned. I returned to the facility before sunrise, the windows catching the river's first light. Volunteers arranged morning activities. A piano was tuned in the recreation room and its notes floated down corridors like a small, steady promise. Staff nodded as I walked through. I set my keys on my desk and felt the air thin as if something had settled at last. Work is a sort of prayer when done well. It is quiet, exact, and reverent. They looked for scorn or applause and found neither. People expected drama after what had happened. There was none. Lena drifted through the halls pushing a wheelchair one afternoon, small-mannered without her usual shine. She did not look for me. She had always known how to be seen. Now she was learning the other side, the details. I let her have the moment as if it were a lesson she needed to learn on her own terms. The institution responded like a living thing. Notices came and went. Vendors called. Staff asked for clarity. I answered with the language of process. Harbor Bridge's structure allowed the system to continue. If standards held, certification stood. If standards slipped, the foundation would act, not as punishment, but to preserve care. The letters I had written and the documents I had filed were not vengeance, they were insurance for fragile lives. My parents sat in a Medicaid waiting room one day, hands clasped, faces empty. They did not see me when I passed. There was no grand confrontation, no triumphant telling off. The house that once held their names like trophies became quieter, less certain. They had been given what they valued most, the image, and lost what they had not understood was essential. Sometimes the truth arrives as small forfeitures rather than big announcements. What surprised me, later, was not a collapse but a slow unspooling. Staff resigned in small waves, not because of me but because the structure of expectations changed. People who had depended on the old rhythms found that their world had shifted. Yet volunteers kept coming. Neighbors walked in more often. Harbor Bridge's protocols meant someone could not simply remodel care into a display. The system's voice began to be louder than any ceremony. Lena found her hands doing things she had not practiced, checking medication lists, learning names that had once been on the edge of her photos. She did so with a humility that was not cruelty but an education. I saw her in a hallway one afternoon, pushing a resident carefully as if learning the contour of a life. She looked small without the spotlight and, for the first time, real. I didn't speak to her. I watched from a distance and let time do its work. People learn in strange ways when their roles change. Months later, a site visit revealed the truth of what I had done and why. Harbor Bridge's structure protected protocols and licenses. Certification held because the work had been preserved. Families who needed care still found steady hands at the other end of the phone. Nothing cinematic occurred. No gates swung open in triumph. The victory was quiet. No one was harmed because someone decided to make process louder than image. Have you ever realized freedom was not flashy? Have you ever watched a life become ordinary and thought maybe ordinary was the point? There was no dramatic finale. No doors slammed. No final reckoning. Instead, there was a line drawn that nobody could unsee. Families fracture loudly, boundaries settle like dust. Soft, inevitable, impossible to sweep away once you stop pretending you are the only thing holding everything up. For the first time, I was not carrying a weight that belonged to someone else. The relief was not a party, it was a clean room and a breath that lasted. My parents saw me differently after that night, but not because they finally praised me. They saw, as people sometimes see things they had hidden in plain sight, the absence where work had been. My mother's eyes stopped crinkling with the practiced smile. My father's stride became shorter, more uncertain. Lena's posture softened into something quieter and less sure. None of those changes were my obligation to fix. The structure I had given the system was enough to keep the people in it safe. That was all I ever wanted. I returned to my routines and found comfort in minutiae, auditing a training log, revising a safety checklist, answering a nurse's midnight question about a pressure sore. These are not glamorous acts, but they are the backbone of care. There is a kind of sacredness in paperwork when lives rest on it. Harbor Bridge was not retribution, it was stewardship. It was a way to make sure the work mattered more than the photograph. Time softened edges. Lena learned how to be small and attentive. She learned the language of medications and the rhythm of bed checks. She began to understand, slowly, that charm does not replace competence. My parents learned that a name does not equal a system. They learned, painfully and quietly, that appearances without structure can collapse. There was grief and there was a lesson that had to be learned by living it. But there was also a thread that could not be broken, the residents and staff who needed steady systems. They kept walking through the doors each day. They kept making small recoveries. They kept the music playing in the rec room. Sometimes I still pass the old dining room and see the exact place where the folder once lay. The red envelope sits in a drawer somewhere like proof that clarity matters. The greatest difference was not in spectacle, but in the air, lighter, clearer, less full of the weight of unspoken expectations. I had been offered the role of invisible labor for too long. I refused it not from spite but from care. I refused it to protect those who had no voice in our family myths. This is not a story of dramatic revenge. It is a story of quiet remaking. You do not always get fireworks when you right a wrong. Sometimes you get protocols, signatures, quiet mornings. Sometimes you get a woman who names a foundation and then walks back into the light, small and ordinary and present. That ordinariness was my freedom. It was the thing I had earned by doing the work day after day, when no one watched. If this story touched you, if you felt the weight of being unseen or the relief of a truth finally named, tell me in the comments. Share your small victories. And if you want more stories like this, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support means I can keep sharing these quiet, true voices.